Hi, Scott.
Hi, Helen. Thanks so much. Great to be here.
So I know you've done a lot. If you could just give a quick intro of yourself for the audience, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I'm a 30-year marketer, so been doing this when there was only 7 means to communicate to consumers. Represented some of the biggest brands in the world, from Harley Davidson to Ford Motor Company to Puma, and also a cancer survivor, and spend a tremendous amount of time in the world of healthcare, healthcare innovation, and patient advocacy.
So you're one of the first I got introduced to in terms of digital data analytics. We've known each other for over 12 years. Could you kind of just walk us through how you get involved as a marketer into this data world and how this would lead to the future with artificial intelligence? Why not? If you could just give us a quick worldview from your perspective, that'd be great.
Yeah, so interesting enough, I started out 30 years ago as an art director writer. So totally opposite other end of the spectrum. But my first client was the casinos in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And if you think about the casinos and how they work, it's kind of interesting on how prevalent the data is. So
Right.
most gamblers have a loyalty card, and the casinos were one of the first actually to issue those. So there's different business units in a casino, everywhere from gaming, which is a key component, to hospitality. Most casinos have hotels, to food and beverage, right? Various restaurants. As you know, most people are familiar with Vegas. Some of the best chefs have entities within the casino environment. Entertainment as well, everything from Cirque du Soleil to some of the top performing musicians. The idea is to understand who are what's called your whales, individuals that come, bring their share of wallet, and utilize all the different services the casino has to offer, compared to a minnow, which is somebody who just comes there for one particular entity and doesn't really spend a lot of money.
Hmm.
So the data is so prevalent, and I never saw anything like it. And as an artist, I would always be asked to write so much copy, one copy block for each of the different cohorts. And I never understood why until they essentially showed me behind the scenes. Um, and it was truly mind-opening to understand all the different permutations, the variables, why people did what they did. And I got to see firsthand that the creative product actually could move the needle and lead to get somebody to do a behavior that we needed them to do at the end of the day. So that was my first grasp of it. And from that moment on, I jumped full force into learning everything about data analytics, how data worked, and the structure of it. And I'll just share a slide because I think it's incredibly interesting.
Thank you.
This is just the history of advertising. And if you think about, where it all began, and, now things are so digital, so real time, but it wasn't always the case. Back in the day, right, there was newspapers and magazines and billboards, and it took 100 years for each of those mediums to come to fruition. And then, 50 years later, direct mail came about with the first catalog from Montgomery Ward's, then radio ads almost 50 years later. Um, and then things slowly rolled out from TV to telemarketing to gaming. But when you look from the 1990s on, so essentially the last 40 years, how much of our ability to communicate is now digital and is now almost real time? And that's everything from pop-up ads to emails to text messaging to, how we actually search for a product using, the Google products. We have podcasts now we never had before, being able to communicate with our phones. And even now there's some billboards out there that are using facial recognition and biometrics to deliver ads to an audience of one. And in the past, it was mass media where any I think there was 6 channels when TV first started, right? NBC, CBS, Fox. I mean, Fox is relatively new, but there wasn't that many opportunities. So what's interesting about that is, when you talk about, like I first mentioned my instance with the casinos, everything's about vast amounts of information. Some of that information we provide ourselves, whether if we're signing up for Facebook for the very first time or signing up for a card, a loyalty card or a credit card, we're providing oftentimes our own demographic information, who we are, where we live, how old we are, that type of information. Sometimes, right, we might fill out a survey, or, we might eat at a restaurant and fill out a Yelp review. So, this is feedback to a situation. Every time I go to a doctor, the doctor wants to know how well my service was. So I fill out feedback in that regards. I fill out my preferences, what I like, what I don't like. And then there's all the behavioral stuff that we do, right? The stuff that we shop. If you ever shop at a grocery store and you're using a loyalty card, they're, tracking your purchase history. There's our interactions to websites. If, anybody can go into the browser of their choice, look at their history and see exactly where they've visited in the past.
Right.
And then, since the ability to have one of these, right, our phone is tracking us at every moment in time. There's not only the device, is it iOS, is it an Android, what version of the software am I using, but the location, everywhere that I've been, the networks that I'm on, whether it's AT&T or Verizon, T-Mobile, every app that I use, everything that I'm doing, I'm essentially leaving a breadcrumb in this world as if I'm Hansel and Gretel from the story time. And we forget that at the end of the day, that everything we do, everything we say, everything we provide is there for marketers to utilize in some regards. And not only that, is the third-party data, right? Look at the credit bureaus, like the Experian, the Equifaxes, they all have vast amounts of information about us. Most people don't realize when you have a birth in the United States, that very first birth, you get actually a picture of your child. It's called the first photo. That company is not affiliated with the healthcare system. They're a marketing organization that sells that data to marketers who need to target new moms. And what's interesting enough, when you're a woman and you go to the OBGYN and you're pregnant, that data itself is called expectant mothers. Experian, the credit bureau, actually owns that data feed. So they know every woman who's pregnant in the United States and when they're going to give birth. So the reason behind all this is there's a tremendous amount of information on all of us. And when you figure out Americans, right, we're 300 million plus people, it's pretty powerful.
Right.
So what's important about that is we need vast amounts of storage space that we've never had before. We need now and then moving forward. Because of there's so much information out there, it could be a text file, it could be a photo, it could be a video. We need a way to essentially bring it all together. And bringing it together where a database can actually understand it and understand the differences. So if it's a text file, we all have a different tonality, right? Sometimes a good example is just, this product right here, right? We all call this thing different. And is it pop? Is it soda? Is it Coke? Again, there's these little nuances based off of oftentimes geographical areas. It could be down to the zip code on what we call things and what we don't. So when you're specifically working with text, taking that text in, understanding it, deciphering it, understanding when people spell something incorrectly or have these geographical nuances is incredibly important. And the biggest thing I think is the velocity, and velocity is more so the speed of which that data is generated and needs to be processed. So think about, right, if you use your credit card outside, right, if you hypothetically go on holiday and you don't notify your bank that you're away, and all of a sudden you try to use your credit card somewhere, oftentimes with almost every major bank, you will instantaneously get a text message in real time asking you if that transaction was made. So that can only happen most likely due to machine learning, AI, vast amounts of data storage, and being able to be processed in real time for that to all happen. So it's pretty powerful and pretty amazing at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And the assumption is with artificial intelligence, marketers are going to become more efficient or effective. How do you think people like you with a history of success could harness this new wave of technology?
Absolutely. So there's an interesting quote in the marketing advertising world, right? That 50% of the spend is often wasted, but we don't
Right,
necessarily know what half is.
right.
So the way I've always done things with my agencies was all about understanding the efficacy in what we did. And that could, determining the client, right? So if I'm working with e-commerce, it's a little bit easier to understand the efficacy, right? I put out a banner ad, a pre-roll video, and then I can understand who clicked on it, who went to the site, and who purchased. Somewhat easy. Other times you have to make inferences. But the biggest thing I think at the end of the day is, again, leveraging the massive amounts of data to measure, analyze the performance of what we did, and then also making sure, is it effective, isn't it effective, what can we do better? But most importantly is truly understanding the customer's behaviors. Again, with all that information out there that I discussed, the information that's inputted by the consumers, understanding their behaviors, and then truly having an intimate personal conversation with that individual, because we do know them so well, is trying to get them to understand why they need what we're selling and why we're selling it and how it benefits them in their lives. And it's truly being that personal, that intimate, almost like you're in a relationship.
That's intriguing. And given that your history as an artist and a writer, how do you think the real-time content generation and targeting could work, based on the massive data that we have today versus, previously?
Yeah, I think it works in two ways. One is contextually targeting, right? And that's displaying ads sort of, if I go to a website, do I know who Scott is, that I can create a website for one? So I'm not just going to a bestbuy.com. It's almost like bestbuy.scottpetinga, right? Because they know everything I've ever bought from Best Buy. They know that my TV's relatively new and I don't need another one. So it literally becomes a curated experience. And I can see the same thing with retailers, right? If they know my size, if they know my style, then I think of it as almost like a personal concierge. Going back to the days of like the travel agent, right? Where instead of going to like Travelocity, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you want to go to the Maldives. Well, here you go. Here's your little served up, ideas, expectations for what you want to do. And I can say it the same way in sort of, that world is we only get served up what our wants, needs, and desires are, and nothing more, nothing less. And the same thing on the, predictive targeting is knowing me so well that you know what I'm going to do next. Right. So it's almost understanding, again, with the cell phone data, right? If I know so when I get into the car, oftentimes, if I'm at the mall and it knows my kid's got to be picked up at a certain time, it puts directions from point A to point B. Or if it knows, like today, my daughter has to go to theater. My phone knows that my daughter has to go to theater. So as it starts to get close to that time, it'll, notify me that it's due to traffic, I have to now leave. And this is the best route to take. So I can see marketing working very similar, where it knows. I've seen refrigerators where there's now sensors on them and they're scanning barcodes on real time, knowing the food that's entering the refrigerator, knowing how many times you're taking the food in and out, and know when it's time to actually order new. So I've seen some new technology where there's actually touchscreens built into the refrigerator, and it's truly understanding consumption of goods and then being able to order stuff before you actually even have to go to the supermarket or before you have to sit at your computer and order it to pick up. So I can see that world all coming together as one.
Okay, so let me take the other side. The flip side of this is really how comfortable everybody is knowing that, knowing that, um, you know, data is out there about everyone and it could work for their convenience, but also may sound, a little scary. How do you think people would, um, not just adopt technology? I think adoption of mobile technology is proven to be fast and exciting. What about the mindset? What's your observation in terms of people's reaction to AI, given how popular topic it is on the news, as well as among, professionals speaking about ChatGPT? Why not?
My biggest thing is I think it's still cloaked in secrecy, right? Is for most people who don't understand, right? AI, there's a basis of knowledge that created it, but we're not aware of what that knowledge base is. And that's why I love, what you guys are doing at AnyQuest is, right, you're sort of being, transparent of sort of the base and working with companies to create their own sort of right knowledge set. So I think
Right.
that's incredibly important is what is it, right? What's the base? What's the foundation that this was built on? Is it sturdy? Because right, no one wants to build something on something that's not sturdy. Is there biases in it? So who's programming it, right? Is it gender biases? Is there race biases, sexuality? So there's all that types of stuff. And then my biggest thing is accountability, right? So what happens if AI is in place and then how we're using it, whether it's a chat bot or whether there's something instances, right? Or we're reviewing breast scans and trying to pinpoint cancer. What happens if something doesn't go correctly and there's negative impacts or errors caused by the AI? Who's accountable? And particularly in the cancer world, right? So I know I'm using services that are using machine learning and AI to supposedly detect a pinpoint of cancer within your body. Well, what happens if it sees something that they think is cancer? I get notified, but it's not.
Right.
The anxiety, the trauma that I've been through, who's responsible? Is there any responsibility? Is that right? Is it neglect? And then I would say, something else is what I'm worried about as a marketer, particularly as a practitioner, what's the ethics and morals behind it, right? Because as I mentioned, I know consumers so well, it could become incredibly simple and easy to manipulate and deceive somebody. So, right, is there any procedures, practices in place that prevent companies from doing that to be able to not exploit particularly vulnerable consumers, but ensure that the content we're generating is of a certain ethical moral value?
100%. I do want to focus on the positive effect, knowing that there are always bad characters out there manipulating people with vulnerability and, disinformation, misinformation, and, all of that is out there. But today, I want to focus on the positive side. And given that you are a, data scientist, you are a marketer, you are innovator, but you are also a cancer survivor. How do you see AI as extension of, of human beings? What's your thought on this so-called immortality? Like, could there be this world of, information, conversation, out there as an alter ego of you and having conversations with others, but you would have the peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, when you look at technology, so the government just allowed for glucose monitoring to essentially be bought over the counter without having a prescription. Huge opportunity, right? Because yes, the glucose monitor is, a highly volatile, device, and it measures, what happens when you eat specific things, particularly for those diabetic or pre-diabetic. But I look at it even as an individual, right? As essentially I biohack as well. So I try to optimize my life based off of my behaviors. So what I like about the glucose monitor is what I eat and what you eat and how it affects our body is completely different because of our genetics, based off our lifestyles. So having that information in real time, if I eat an apple and peanut butter, what happens compared to if I just eat an apple? And then literally in real time what happens. And then with these other devices, one is called an Oura Ring, right, which is a device that you wear around your finger, similar to an Apple Watch, but it measures all my behaviors. It measures my sleep, measures my resting heart rate, the heart rate variability. So there's so much data. Again, it all comes down to massive amounts of data, and we're adding to that all the time. So how I sleep, what I eat, my genetics, right, my hereditary disposition to get certain things and other things. So I truly think with all this information now, we have the ability to live the most optimal part of our lives. So that's what I'm excited about. And again, with new technologies, that are constantly coming out, I think the big problem with Americans, right, is we're very reactive when it comes to medicine. But I'm hoping with a lot of this new technology, we'll be able to live more, proactive. So we can understand our likelihood to get cancer rates, depending on our ethics, our, where we've lived, how, there's also studies that are pretty amazing where if you live closer to a highway, you're more likely, right, to get some cancers if you live further away from a highway system. So I think a lot of that, right, can come into play where they take some of the data that we would input, all the places we've ever lived, zip code level data, street level data, tied into like EPA data, and then looking at our behavioral data, and then all these other data feeds to truly saying this is what you should and shouldn't do. And then another thing that I'm seeing as well is, again, with massive amounts of information, I think most individuals at the end of the day, once you start to, get into your late 30s, you have multiple relationships with medical facilities. Currently, each facility has their own portal. As a cancer survivor, I have 20 different, relationships with healthcare providers. I'm also a caregiver to my kids. They each have relationships. I also help out with my aging parents, and they have massive amounts of relationships with facilities. There's organizations out there that are taking all that information and sucking it into a single sign-in portal. And then baked into that is machine learning and AI. So it's able now to look at me as an individual, not that, oh, this is his heart stuff, this is his bone stuff, this is his cancer stuff, right? Instead of having these silos of data, now they're looking at me as a patient, as a consumer of medicine, and they're able to make recommendations based off of me holistically, and then what's in the best interest of me, based off my age, based off my family's history, when I should go in and get an exam.
Right.
Not necessarily like all 35-year-olds need to get this.
Right.
Not necessarily relevant. Is like you're 35-year-old, your parents had this, you're this makeup from your DNA testing. We highly recommend that you get a prostate exam next week. We've already scheduled it for you using, again, AI. Show up, ready to go. The doctor will see you then.
Okay, let us know your new venture. What are you working on right now, Scott? And how people can reach out to you for, more conversation with you or asking for your advice or, support.
Yeah, right now I'm working for Visible, which is a subsidiary of Modern Climate. So what we do really well is using that movement data, understanding where the consumers are, and then having intimate conversations with them through omni-channel communications. So it could be via their home in direct mail. It could be on their phone. It could be on a pre-roll during a YouTube video. Pretty powerful stuff, mind-blowing stuff. Not a lot of companies are doing it. We've been doing it for a long time, and that's what we excel in.
Awesome. Do you help with content as well, or they need to have their own creative to feed
Yeah, we're
in?
actually, we're full service. So we can either utilize creative and repurpose it for the channels that we work in, or we have a full-blown creative team in-house as well. So we're experts when it comes to brand, demand, and technology.
Want to show people your website?
Yeah, so it's modernclimate.com. So that's the parent.
Well, congratulations. I wish you great success, and I thank you for your generosity with your time and insights. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, Scott.
Likewise, had a great time.